Hello and welcome to the Legendary Ladies podcast. Thanks for joining us back here in 2025 after our winter break. And we have an exciting one for you guys this time because we are speaking to Fiona Fenn, who is the author of the new book The Crack at the Heart of Everything, which is a gay fantasy romance.
You guys will like
And
it.
it's very fun.
Literally something for every one of us. It's perfect.
It's perfect. Yeah, it's the Venn diagram of all of our interests in one thing. So thank you so much for coming and joining us, Fiona.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me and also reading the book.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's
of course.
I enjoyed. I actually read it on a vacation, so I feel like I read it the way it was meant to be read, like in a pool on my Kindle, just sort of floating along. I highly recommend that to our listeners if they can manage it.
If they
Take
can
it on
float,
vacation.
float along. I
in
always
the
do good
pool.
reading on a plane. That's usually how I do it. Is just plane rides.
That's also a great way a great way to read it.
I feel like it came out in November and I was just thinking in my head, like this is a summer read. This really is
Yeah,
an
I
escapist,
agree. I was in Florida in November randomly enough, and so I was like, "Nice, I get to have the summer reading experience
yes.
even in November." So Fiona, do you want to give us like your pitch about the book, a little summary of what The Crack at the Heart of Everything is about?
Yeah, so it's about an evil dark wizard who gets banished into the world he helped conquer and experiences a moral crisis. And he also falls in love.
That part is important.
It is important.
It's so interesting because I think your main character is a villain, quote unquote. So I was wondering, what was it that made you want to explore sort of like the mindset of the villain, and what do you think makes villains or like morally gray characters so interesting?
It's something I've always I've been writing a while and I'm always writing the fix it fanfics for the villains who die in a piece of media.
Yep.
That's just I fall in love with them. They're always queer coded. I'm like, this person's just really traumatized. They're not actually evil. And if they'd just been given a little love, then they would have gotten a happy ending too. So that's very simply what
They're just a
inspired
little
the book. Yeah, they
misunderstood.
only killed a billion people. It's okay.
They just wanted those Dalmatians to be a coat. It's
Yes.
not
Nothing too bad.
So-
Nothing too
They were
terrible.
cold.
exactly. They're cold.
So, Fiona, as a nerd who also likes to come up with alternate theories on why characters do things, I am just curious what characters that we would already know about, what characters that currently exist, have you rewritten either in your head or on Wattpad?
Oh yeah, like what was your
fan?
what was
Okay,
your fan fiction you kind of lived with?
Be honest.
Disclaimer, I'm on AO3 because it all involves smut. But
Of course.
this is
approved.
embarrassing. But I went it was my pandemic rabbit hole, that hyper focus that I think everybody ended up with when um it was Star Wars General Hux, who's the redheaded guy played by
Yeah.
Donald Gleason.
Yeah.
I wrote a 300,000 word redemption arc for this guy.
You're like, hold on though, I could fix him?
Yeah. And he gets with Poe Dameron of all people.
That's perfect. That's perfect.
Wait, what is it called so that people can find it /
I
me?
have no shame. It's called Terms of Surrender, and I write under the name Baraja.
Nice.
And did you get
Perfect.
a lot of feedback on it, or was it one of those things
Oh,
I just
yeah.
got to get out there?
It's one of the bigger. It's a tiny ship, so this is in consideration of how many people are actually reading the ship. It's probably one of the top big fics that got written. But I mean, it's pretty good. It's probably the best thing I've ever written. And The Crack of the Heart Everything is my cool down book. If you want the serious shit, go read Terms of Surrender.
Were you thinking about it at the same time, or were you just no, I wrote this fan fiction and then went into the novel?
Yeah, no, I just kept the momentum going, and I'm well, let's just write a original story. I have a million in my head, I have the big ones that I've been thinking about for like decades. I'm like, one day I'll write this and I'll get it published. But you don't want that to be your first book, because most people don't get their first book actually published. So it's kind of like, I wanted to write something that I would be okay if it didn't go anywhere, because it's not like the characters in my heart. And then, of course, I become deeply attached to these characters, and I'm querying for like a year, and I'm like, I'm gonna get this book published. It's great. And then,
My babies.
yeah, but I just like, I just trauma wrote for the pandemic, and then kept it going, and it's working out okay.
So the world building that you worked on for this book, I know when I'm putting together stories and I'm laying things out, I feel like sometimes I grab bits and pieces from different worlds that I've created in my head. When you were putting together this world, was this something that flew together organically, or had you already planned, like, okay, I knew that I wanted a world with these sort of creatures and this sort of magic system, or did you have to make it work for the story you wanted to tell?
Yeah, I think when I write, I kind of start with like the character arc that I want to see, and then I build the world out from that. So like, how can the world support this character arc that I want my character to go through? So a lot of the world building, they call it like discovery writing. So like the first 20K of like that book was basically, I didn't have a plan. I'm just like discovery writing and seeing what comes out of it. And then by that point, like, you kind of have established like the rules and the magic and the general laws of the land and that sort of thing. And then the rest of the world building blossomed from that. But I think when I went into it, I really was just focused on not overthinking things either. Like, I just wanted to write and enjoy the process and get the book out and not overthink it, which now that I'm writing the sequel, I am in the opposite. I'm overthinking everything. And there's a lot more to think about, because you have to remember all the rules you created in book one that you have to abide by now, and it's hard.
I was going to ask you about the magic system, because I feel like that's always a big thing in fantasy books, and this always seems so complicated to come up with. And like, how did you come up with it? And is it, now that, spoiler alert for people listening, there's going to be a second book, which we're excited about, but now that you're working on book two, has anything that you established in book one, you're like, oh no?
Well, not really. It's actually been fun, because the magic system in, like, if you read The Crack of the Heart, everything, which hopefully you will, it stars Orpheus, and he's like an unreliable narrator, so he doesn't even know like half of what a typical person in this world would know. He's kind of discovering a lot of this alongside you. Even though he's been a mage, he's just always been able to do magic, and he has this innate understanding of it, and like, that's been enough for him, and you're seeing the world through his eyes. So actually in book two, a lot more world building happens. You get a lot more about the history and how magic worked before Orpheus was ever in the picture. And it's actually stuff that I've had in my head, and like, my understanding of it has always existed, but it didn't really have a place in the first book, because he doesn't know a lot, and you can't really info dump things that the character doesn't know. So
I thought that was something that was so interesting about reading the book, which is that you're in Orpheus's perspective, and he's so sheltered that you kind of are getting to see the world through his eyes, and his understanding of the world is so limited. So I thought it was so interesting, like, as you go along, you start to realize, oh, this isn't like just fantasy. I think this is post-apocalyptic. And I thought that was so interesting how you decided to do that.
yeah, it's like you build that fantasy world, at least I do, to like, as a shell, like a protection. It's like you come up with your own version of reality as like a defense mechanism. And that's absolutely what he did. And so then having those layers peeled back through the book and like revealing it to the reader, because they don't know, they like go in thinking this is just a straight up fantasy book, because that's what Orpheus thinks, and that's one of like the fun reveals. And I hope it's fun. I've gotten some criticism where people are like, this is supposed to be fantasy and it's not, and I'm like,
I thought the criticism was going to be like, it wasn't fun for Orpheus to find that out.
Yeah.
This isn't a real castle?
doesn't, and you guys are gonna have to remind me because I've never actually read the books, the Shannara books, but the TV show, the Shannara series, that's post-apocalyptic, and people wouldn't realize it. It's got a very complex magic
Oh,
system,
is it?
but it's
It's
well,
been
yeah. At one
ages
point, they're
since I've watched
traveling and they're going through San Francisco.
Oh,
Like,
right.
Oh,
That's right.
Yeah,
maybe
so
I need to. I don't
it-
think I've ever read them. That
I gotta get
sounds
back to
you
that
can totally be
TV
like,
show.
Terry Brooks did it, guys.
Guys.
But okay, so one of the challenges that I have seen recently with a very popular book series is that people get frustrated when you're on book 3 or book 4 and you're just massively info dumping and world building at that point. There's a very popular series where that's become a big issue for book 3 right now. They're like, it's literally too much
Spill
world
the
building.
tea. Wait, what's the book?
Wait, what's the book?
Yeah,
Yeah.
name drop the book.
I don't think you understand. I
it
am
the-
scared to mention it because
Is it the
we're
fairy
gonna
book?
Wait,
get. No, it's not a fairy book.
Discourse just
It's
gets
a
views.
dragon book.
Oh, is it Onyx Storm?
Yes.
Okay, I've only read the first one.
I haven't read any
Me,
of them,
I'm
so I
on-
don't
Me
know.
neither.
I'm on book 2, but I can't avoid
So you haven't gotten to book
Instagram.
3 yet.
I haven't gotten to book 3, but there's been so much stuff on Instagram where people are like, we're just confused because there was too much world building, it was too much info dumping, and characters are showing up literally for the plot, and they're like, we've never heard of this character before, ever. They show up, they did the thing, and they left, and they're like, this makes no sense. So how far out do you plot in advance? Because you're talking about, okay, so I've had this idea and understanding of this magic and this world in my head, but how much of that do you, maybe when you're getting to writing the sequel, and I know, Kat, you've dealt with this before when you're writing your sequels, where you're like, oh, crumb, I've written myself into a corner. How do I get out of this? Has there ever been a moment like that for you, or are you a methodical planner?
I'm pretty good at plotting. I'm pretty good about knowing the ending before I start
Okay.
writing. And I think that is key. Like if you
The complete
know
ending or the ending of a
Yeah.
chapter?
the ending, the complete ending, like where the
Yeah.
entire thing is headed.
Mhm.
So like I didn't even really start writing like book 2. I'm about halfway through words wise, but it wasn't probably until I hit 40,000 that I went and zero drafted that book and then the next book because I'm like I knew roughly what the ending was, but like how you get there is like the real that's the difficult part. But if you know where you're headed, I think you can avoid writing yourself into a corner more times than not. If anything, you'll encounter like a mechanical law that you created that suddenly doesn't work and you have to get a little loosey-goosey to solve that problem. But not so much like a plot that is like a wall standing in
you're
the
like,
way.
Darn past me for creating this magic rule.
Yeah.
Oh, do you feel like now with the sequel book that now that people have read your story and you've heard people's feedback that you like get their voice in your head though, or is it just like, no, it's my story, or even on positive or negative way, like the positive things people really liked, you're like, oh, I want to do more of that, or the negative thing is like, oh, maybe I should do less of that.
Yeah, I think avoiding any kind of feedback besides the people you trust,
That's probably for the
that
best.
is for the best. Because like your book isn't going to be for everybody. People are inevitably going to either love it or maybe like it, or some people hate it. So like that's just not your audience. But I have a close group of readers who were my ARC readers and have been very supportive. And they won't read the book before it's in its like final draft, but they know the characters and I can bounce ideas off of them, or like, kind of like get the feedback, like, is this fun? Do you guys think you'd like this idea if it happened? And like get their reaction. So I think if I want any kind of feedback like that, I go to them, but then it's my very close friends, my partner and like my best friend who will like read the novel first and I'll get their actual like creative feedback because I trust them. I know they know what they're talking about.
Now, I've always wondered when you're writing stuff like this, I've always loved the phrase "kill your darlings" because I've had it happen before in short story contests where I have a word count and I want to keep that phrase, I want to keep that character, and I want to keep that paragraph, and it's just not working. But on a larger scale, if we're willing to get a little spoilery for a second, was there a chapter, a scene, a moment that you just couldn't make work in this book, that if you could, like the deleted scene, director's cut, that you would put back in?
There's something that got moved from the first
Oh.
book. Yeah,
Okay.
to the second book. And that
Okay.
I'm excited about, but I won't spoil that.
Okay, don't spoil the book
Fair.
that's
They're
not
juicy.
out.
But the first book could be read as a standalone. So, and my publisher actually had me add a couple chapters to the beginning, because it kind of established like the baseline of like where Orpheus is coming from and stuff. So that was actually fun because I am an overwriter. I will write, and like I really like doing like the like internal monologuing. Like Orpheus is just internal monologuing for most of the book. One of the reviews I read was like, there's very little dialogue, but Orpheus is talking the entire time.
That's so
Orpheus
true,
has a
though.
lot of thoughts and
I
feelings.
noticed that.
Yeah. But it was fun that, because most people are like, you have to cut this many words. My publisher is like, let's add some stuff. And I'm like,
I love that for your publisher. Where did you get the idea of format-wise introducing the interludes? Because I found those to be the most enlightening part of the book for me.
oh, that makes me really happy. They just came out. Like the first one came out and I'm like, oh, I really like these. And honestly, present tense is like how I normally write. That's like, if you go read my fanfic, like 9 out of 10 of the stories are going to be in present tense. I love it. I just find it to be like an incredibly like beautiful, immersive, like you just get straight in the like thick of like the characters and like what's happening, and it's how I prefer to write. But like publishing wants you to write fantasy in past tense. So I wrote the book in past tense, but they were my excuse to like get a little like purple prosy and like write how I kind of more naturally write. And but they came about completely organically. I didn't plan them, but they are in the second book too. So I'm keeping the theme going.
The main two characters, I feel like they're very different types of characters. Was it challenging writing the romance between those characters? And what do you think is one of the more challenging things
Hold
about
on.
writing a
Hold on.
compelling romance?
She
She's
just
like,
told
no.
us she did a Hux Poe romance.
That's
She's
true.
a definitive grumpy sunshine.
I can
And
make
now
anyone
she's
fall.
got
Sunshine,
grumpy
I
sunshine
think.
here.
Yeah, I
This is
think
great.
Grumpy Sunshine is.
It's your trope.
Yeah, you don't want like two people with identical personalities. Two happy people, that's fine. I'm happy for you. But where's the like
Where's the
tension?
drama?
Yeah.
Things are too happy.
Oh my gosh. And I'm excited because in book 2, it's like Orpheus is grumpy in book 1, but he turns into an absolute gremlin in book 2. He just has a slide backwards. I'm very excited to go into.
That's amazing. He's regressing.
Yeah.
Now, what do you feel like you learned about publishing now that you've published? Like, what would you like to tell people who are like looking to publish things, or just like something you want to remind yourself about?
Oh my God. I had the experience of getting a book published. Have any of y'all done it? Gone through querying?
Yeah, well, I am
Sort of.
yeah, I run my own
pointing to
business.
Kat. I don't know.
So yeah, I run my own comic book
The other
business.
way.
So
There you go.
yeah.
You know what it's like. The rejection. I went through art school. I'm like been in a creative field. I know like how to take criticism and feedback, but nothing can prepare you for the amount of rejection that the publishing industry will hand you. And I'm one of the lucky ones who like first book querying got it picked up, but like I had my first panic attack. This is you like asked me. You didn't expect me to trauma dump, did you?
No, trauma dump. We're here. We're also a therapy
Welcome to the Legendary
session.
Ladies podcast.
Yeah.
Exactly. You're like, I'm actually still not okay from it.
You want me to talk about publishing?
And let me tell you about my first panic attack.
I'm still working my way through it.
I'm in therapy now. So it's true, I am. No,
We
it's
love that.
just like if it's your dream to like get traditionally published, absolutely pursue it. But I think if I am person who like had to get traditionally published. Like I had to have a publisher say I was good enough. And like I'm glad I got that validation, but at the end of the day, it's unnecessary. If your dream is writing and you want to put your books out there, don't wait for someone else to tell you go. Just self-publishing is bigger than anything right now. And publishers
Yeah.
are seeking out self-published authors rather than signing their own new debuts. Like that is where the majority of their like money and acquisitions are going, is seeking out these self-published authors who are showing success on their own and then snatching them up and turning it into trad pubs. So I think it's changing really fast. Publishing isn't what it was like even 5 years ago or 3 years ago when I started this process. And to just, that's your dream and that's what you want to do. Just, if querying gives you panic attacks and makes you want to quit, just self-publish.
You don't have to.
Well,
Yeah.
You said something interesting, which is how long did the process take you from like the
That's a good
time that you finished the novel to like, when it came out? Because
Yeah.
you mentioned 3 to 5 years, and I don't think some
No,
people
it wasn't
realize
that.
how long some of these processes sometimes do take.
I'm with a very small press. So like my book, once they bought it, like I didn't have to wait that long. A lot of big publishers is like 2 years from acquisitions to something ending up on a shelf. It just takes that long. And some of that is like coordinating marketing and like edits, sure. But it's also just they're so massive that they're slower. They're not as efficient as like a small publisher. But I finished writing in January. I don't even know what time means anymore. I think I started querying.
that's okay. This month has been 9 years long.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's okay.
100%.
You're asking
In my
me
brain,
Still in
it's still,
January.
in my brain, it's still 2019, so it's cool.
I was going to say it's still 2024, but nope, it's just 2019 for you.
Yep.
I think it was like a year from starting the process to when it got bought, and then another year from when it got bought to when it got published. So 2 years, and then probably like the time it took me to write, but I think I wrote and started querying. It was like 6 months. So yeah, like 2.5 years from the start to the end.
Anything that's worth it takes time. And honestly,
Yeah.
what you're saying about self-publishing is so true, because again, I work from the comic side of stuff, but publishing has changed so much. And
Yeah.
when I was like wanting to do traditional stuff, I was like, oh, let me try, querying and like pitching to people and like, get rejection. He's like, okay, let me make my thing. And then once, we made our thing and made good money on it, that's when we started getting jobs. And you're like, and now we see like those jobs that we get is like this amount of money, and the money we can make is this. So it's just like, oh, it's nice to have those jobs because you're working on things that would be fun, but in the most part, you can actually make doing the self-publishing stuff.
And I think my publisher is fantastic. I absolutely love working with them. So this isn't like
a dig.
None of this is like towards them, because they're like, I honestly feel like if you're gonna go the trad pub route, like find yourself a really solid small press, because they're gonna treat you so much like you'll actually be like a person to them and not just like a release for the springtime, but it's sorry, I gotta get my thoughts together. You can cut this part. Hold on. Sorry. I don't want to say something that gets me blacklisted.
No, that's totally fine. And
that's okay.
And this is the challenge with publishing, is that you are a small author. You do have to think about this kind of stuff. And I have seen it bite people in the butt. Not particularly this author, but you're talking about how people start with small press and then, or self-publish, and then the big companies pick up. That's how Fourth Wing got picked up. Fourth Wing was originally self-published.
Really?
And it got a major TikTok following, I believe, if I'm correct.
No, actually,
Am I wrong?
Fourth Wing is it Red Tower who publishes them? That is their IP. The publisher came up with Fourth Wing, the idea, and hired Rebecca Yaris to write it for them.
Wrong.
Yeah, so
Oh, that's
which
wild.
is like really interesting. I actually encountered that for my first time. It was like a publisher put out like a call for submissions for an idea that was their own IP
Huh.
that they wanted an author to write. And apparently that's kind of common. It's more common now than it
Oh.
was before. Um, but I think there are small press people though who have gone through what you said, Amy, and I've seen it happen where like they go from a very successful self-publishing situation to suddenly like you're kind of just locked into the trad pub model, and it's not as lucrative. And
Mhm.
the scary thing is that not scary for us as an author, but scary for publishing, and something that maybe they should keep in mind is that once someone builds a name, if your contract doesn't lock you into like they get right of first refusal on like your next piece of work, like they can just take that following that someone has built and start self-publishing after using tradpub as their jumping off point. And like at that point, how is tradpub going to pivot to because right now it's like it's the opposite, but I can easily see how that could get turned on them. So publishing is wild right now. I don't recommend getting into it.
It
No,
seems like a dark
Fanfic.
place.
Much
no,
more.
Yeah.
Right
it's
there, right
crazy.
there. Like General Hux needs more stories of love.
Yeah, that's what everyone's really aching for.
It's true. The people yearn for it.
And the part that's crazy about publishing too, because again, just seeing from the comic side, I don't know if you know much about this side, but like for us, it's distributing comics right now. So there's no like, the distributor that used to do stuff for comic books is now in bankruptcy. So they're like, how are we getting our books out? So it's like also even just in that side of stuff, it's like, how do we like do this?
How do we
The
actually
thing,
print them now?
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's actually get to like comic book stores and stuff like that, and that's like it's been interesting to see that. And obviously with traditional publishing, it's a Venn diagram because I know like Penguin Random House and stuff like that does stuff for traditional, but that's who's right now like running some of the stuff for like Marvel Comics. So it's interesting to see kind of the Venn diagram of also like digital books too. I'm sure too is like, oh, who's reading digitally, who's not, and I don't know. Publishing keeps changing, and I think in a good and bad way. But I think it's just fun to see something evolve and see which direction it ends up going. But yeah, where do you feel like people are reading your books? Do you think a lot of people are reading in bookstores? Do you feel like people are reading it on Kindle? Is that a good thing for you? Like, where should people be picking up your book?
Yeah, I think digital is great. I prefer digital because it's less economic impact,
Mhm.
but also the margins are a lot better for authors and what
Really?
royalties they end up getting.
Really?
Yeah,
Can
yeah.
you elaborate on that a little bit? Because I'm genuinely just now very curious.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, my royalty, I won't say the exact numbers because I
Yeah.
don't know if that's like a faux pas or not, but I get about 4 times as much from a digital sale, like versus a paperback, because the margins on like a
That
hard
makes sense.
piece of
Oh,
a
yeah.
hardcover or a paperback, they're
Yeah.
so slim because the product is so expensive to create. But
Hmm.
the digital, it's just a file.
$0.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, that's it. But I think the real money is in audiobooks,
I was
because
just about to say that.
oh.
Yeah.
yeah, that's like, I think just over the last few years, the amount of people listening to audiobooks has like skyrocketed. And I know me personally, the only way I'm finishing a book in a reasonable amount of time these days is if it's an audiobook. Because I can just put it on in my car. I can put it on when I'm in my studio while I'm at work doing tedious stuff. Like I can just knock out an audiobook. I read a book, I fall asleep on the couch. It's
So
really
true, though.
sad.
Or
Yeah, I know
or
people who
books that
like
are
love the audiobooks.
like books that are more complex and world building. You get a good narrator, you as your own reader narrator in your brain, you might get bored, but you get a good enough narrator, they will keep you hooked. I have definitely started books physically that I would not have finished had it not been for the audiobook that went
Yeah.
along with it.
And
Even
to
with
what you
famous
said,
authors.
yeah, I think that they can bring something extra to it too. Like
Yeah.
if you've ever read Red Rising. Have you read those books
I
by
know
I've
of
heard
them.
of them.
Chris
Yeah.
Brown? They're fantastic, and I highly recommend the audiobook version because the narrator, like, I'll give you a rundown. So it's like the planets in the solar system are color coded. So Mars is red, and they work in
Interesting.
mines and stuff, and they're kind of like downtrodden, a little bit abused of like a people. And the narrator of this book has this like really broguish kind of Scottish accent that just like makes you think of
Fun.
like an Irish person who's like, you know, just nose of the grindstone, like farmer type. And it like adds this whole extra layer of world building to the book itself that like when you read it just on paper, like you wouldn't have gotten that. And for me, it just like sucked me in. Like I had a complete
yeah.
picture of like the world and the characters and like their role that they play. It's just so well done. I love audiobooks.
If you had an
Fiona-
audiobook, what would you want for your book to kind of sound and feel like? Or is there a person you want to narrate?
I might
your
have
dream?
an audiobook.
Oh,
last
okay, there you go.
week, my publisher had the contract in hand.
I love
so
that.
I don't know if it
Ooh.
got signed. He like I don't know, like left it off like Friday that it was being signed as they spoke, but I never got confirmation. I'm kind of scared to ask.
That's
They're
exciting.
like, no, we don't want it anymore. But I actually
No, they'll want it.
I hope so. I already have like a narrator that I had picked out because I had negotiated my own publishing contract, and I had asked, like, okay, if you all don't sell the rights or start production on an audiobook within a year of publishing, I'd like them to revert back to me because I'll like self-produce something. And so I had already picked out a narrator, and turns out he works for the company that I think my book's rights got sold to. So I'm like,
Oh.
do I ask them, like, consider
Do it.
this person?
You're like, you know what? In my mind, it was this person. So maybe wink, wink.
Yeah.
It's kind of
Yeah.
Okay,
okay,
so this might be kind of fun for me from an audio narration perspective. Is there a word? Is there a name? Is there a location? Most of your names are pretty easy to pronounce, at least in my head. But is there something where like, no, you have to pronounce it Hermione, not Hermione? Like, what is it's Dumbledore?
Not a word, but more like just how Orpheus should sound as a whole. Like he very clearly in my head, he needs to sound a little like snobby and panicked and bitchy. Like that's basically they got to pull that off.
Is he like in your head? Because in my head, I heard a little bit of like Snape meets Loki.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
That was like closer to my imagination too. Yeah, Amy.
Like Tom Hiddleston doing Alan Rickman.
Oh my
That's
god,
what was in my head.
That's it. All right, I'm gonna get him on the phone and be like, "Can you do this?"
And then when it comes out and we see Tom Hiddleston, we'll be like, I think that was because of us.
We did this.
In this podcast.
Yeah.
I'll just slide into his DMs and be like, "Hey, are you
But
busy?"
let's have some fun with fan casting. So I think one of the big things that has made this sort of self-publishing world grow so much in the last 5 years has been book talk and TikTok and Instagram and Bookstagram, because it is so easy for people to share, and algorithms make it easy for you to find other fans, and then you just build and build and build. But one of the big things that's become really popular in those groups is, all right, who are we going to fan cast for A Court of Thorns and Roses? Who are we going to fan cast for Fourth Wing? You know, that stuff. So if you could fan cast any actor in your head for your main characters, who's playing who?
I know Fenrir. I don't know Orpheus. And y'all like deal with celebrities like on your podcast. I am the worst person. If I can remember a person, I know their name, I'm like on solid ground. Asking me to like name an actor, I'm like, I don't know. But
Like, who's Chris Evans?
Did y'all see the Furiosa, the movie?
I didn't, but
Oh,
no,
I
Okay.
haven't
yeah.
yet, but I hear it's great.
if you watch it, I think it's Chris Hemsworth plays a guy named, oh God, his name is so good. His character name is like Don, I'm gonna look it up. But him in that movie, I watched that movie. I'm like, oh, he's got to be Fenrir. He just looks like him. Hold on, I'm gonna.
Dementus.
Dementus.
Dementus. That's an
So
amazing
good.
name.
It was so funny. I love that character in that movie. But like, yeah, he could pull off Fenrir. It's gotta get kind of ripped. The guy who was in Wicked, the guy
Jonathan
who,
Nathan Bailey.
yeah, if he got
Oh,
beefier, he could play Fenrir because he has more of the personality, and Chris
Okay, though,
Hemsworth
you
has
know
the
what?
arms.
If we combine them, Frankenstein
Yes.
style.
There was a moment. There was. So this will kind of pivot us to a different conversation. I don't typically read queer media. That's not. It's just. It's.
We
it's
force
not
you to
something
do
that's
it.
typically-
I
for
read
this
straight media
podcast.
typically. So
No, and it's
So funny. It's like,
but
yeah,
in my
we make
head,
Amy do this for homework for the podcast. So she's like, on my own
Look.
time.
Look, I read a lot of smut, okay? But it's usually hetero smut. That's the way that it goes. So in my brain, as I was starting to read some of these, like as the romantic scenes started getting a little bit more lingering touches, and oh, his hand is right on the gear shift, which is right next to his
gear
knee. And I was like, oh, the things that went through my brain was actually Jonathan Bailey and Matt Bomer from Fellow Travelers.
Oh my goodness.
That actually helped me. As at one point I was like, oh, this reminds me of that, because they are Grumpy Sunshine in that book.
They are,
and
yeah.
they've got the same sort of personalities. And that actually did help me visualize the book better. And it struck me how important that representation is, because again, it's not something I would normally have watched. We watched it for the podcast when we did a pilot pod about Fellow Travelers, but that really helped me sort of connect with these characters. So when you're writing queer media, right, like this, and you're getting a chance to see this representation, what does it mean to know that you are helping introduce that to someone who may not necessarily be exploring this on their own?
It's a interesting question, because you're asking someone who's kind of had to read straight media their entire lives and didn't get the representation that they wanted. And like, even I mean, there's people out there, the more normalized we can make it, the better everyone's going to be. Like, I write queer normative world, so that's all I want, where like this conversation would just be irrelevant because everyone's just like, they're in love, like, and I can relate to that, because love has no borders, it has no gender. It's just like two people finding connection in one another, and that's a universal theme. So to reach the point where someone can just read whatever kind of romance they pick up, and it doesn't matter who the characters are. They could be transgender, they could be no gender, they could be aliens. You see it now everywhere. Like, people are just breaking those barriers down, and there's romances between airplanes and businessmen. If you've seen any of Chuck Tingle's stuff, who's like blown up.
That is true. Chuck Tingle does some wild ones.
Yeah.
But
people love it.
connect
And
with it.
yeah, because at the end of the day, it's like, it's the story, and the human connection is something that, you know, is undeniable and shared amongst all of us. And
I think with like with book bans and things like that happening more frequently now, I think it's maybe more important than ever to have these, you know, these kind of romances more normalized. And to Amy's point, I know she reads a lot of romantasy. I read like a little bit, but I will say, I think I haven't seen a lot of queer romantasy books out there, and I think it's great that they're starting to be more.
I didn't know that was a word until just now.
Romantasy?
Oh, Pat, you're not on Book Talk. You're not on Bookstagram.
I have never taught you the word romantasy. Morgan,
No,
we are
first time.
failing in our
We're
fundamental.
falling down
Oh
the
my
job.
god.
First time I'm
How
hearing this
could
one.
we not?
This is so much of what Amy reads.
It really
Romantasy.
is. My entire bookshelf is either historical fiction, shit from the Tudor time period, like the
That
whole
new.
history of the Plantagenets, or romantasy. That's all it is.
Nothing's taking place in current day for Amy.
No, there's like
Why would you want
I'm
it?
really not kidding. I have a 200 book library, most of which I've never read. And I think there are literally 4 modern day books, and I actually
I
don't
believe
even
it.
know. If
And
there's
you'll
that
never
many.
go back to them.
What
We don't
are
wanna
they? Who
live.
knows?
Yeah, reading should be,
Take us out of modern day. Modern
It's-
day is hell.
all reading's political,
day
but
is
it doesn't
hell.
have to be that political.
Yeah, that's so true.
It can be political with swords.
Yeah.
So that's actually an interesting question. When we're reading things, and you want to connect with readers, we're connecting with readers on the. I love what you said about how love is limitless, and it doesn't matter, that connection that you find. That's what's important. That's the universal theme. But you do tackle some other more difficult themes in your book. What one would you say was maybe the most important to you to make sure that you included? Which one did you have to make sure you didn't hammer so hard that you maybe distracted from a different part of the story?
Yeah, I think, and I love villains. I love villains, and I wrote a book from the villain's perspective. But Orpheus is arguably like that B-side, bumbling, like pathetic, like sidekicky villain. Like he is not the big bad. And a lot of some of the negative feedback I got was like on this book was that people didn't like Lore because she wasn't relatable. And one of the things I went into writing this book was like, people need to be able to identify villains that you can sympathize with and see, healing in the future with, versus the villains where you are not supposed to like this person. They are psychopathic, narcissistic, evil, and you need to be able to identify that. So like having them be foils of one another, but still like villains, and they've gone through the same life experiences, but one processed them differently and one processed them like not at all. And just that was a point. Like you weren't supposed to like Lore and feel sorry for her. She's a psychopath.
So, can I tell you something? And I'm genuinely curious what your response is going to be, because I wonder if this is what you were looking for. I didn't read like quote the back of the book, right? I just dove right into the arc. And it was not until I went to look up the photo of the front of the book that I also saw the back of the book and read the back caption. I did not perceive Orpheus as a villain until I read the back part of that. For a good 7 or 8 chapters, Orpheus was just a misunderstood, weirdo, kind of scary Snape-like character to me. Like, I did not perceive him as a villain in any way, shape, or form, but Lore was 100% miss, like, oh, I'm gonna just lean on this large
I was just
Lore-
amazing.
thing.
Yeah,
Or it's
like,
just in the shadows, like
Don't we-
slowly climbing out.
yeah, who doesn't
No,
want to
I
ride
really
like a
didn't perceive him
skeleton
as a
around with a
villain.
big sword?
At
That's
all.
true, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I
He's
think
on the
that's-
giant Home Depot skeleton for the entire book. As I would also like to be. I was like, am I relating too much to Lore?
Well, I think Orpheus didn't really think of himself as a villain necessarily either. Like he knew like people were scared of him, and like he had this isolation that I think kind of caused this disconnect between him and the rest of the world. That kind of, the hermit. People are always going to worry about the quiet guy in the back of the classroom who's not talking. Like he could do nothing and he would still be like, we gotta worry about him. And that is, but he never, like, you got the flashbacks. He never really understood the gravity of what he had done for Lore. He bolstered her up as like this hero who was building an empire and saving all these people. Like he was helping her achieve something like worthwhile, and maybe he some heads rolled in the process, but you know, what
cult
doesn't come
mentality.
without sacrifice? Like, I think him and Fenrir have that conversation on the tower where, you know, they're kind of discussing, like, Orpheus is trying to defend lore, and you just realize kind of the hoops that he's jumped through in order to accept the reality that he's been living all this time. And Fenrir's like, no, it doesn't have to be that way. So yeah, Orpheus doesn't really, and you're getting from his perspective, it's very close third person. So like he doesn't see himself as a villain. So, but it is like the character archetype. So yeah, the back of the book, he's supposed to be like the evil dark sorcerer who's helping.
Yeah.
He's the what is it? The Saruman to the
Yeah.
Sauron, but Saruman knew what he was doing. He's more
Saruman's
like,
like, my bad. It's a very much you know, it's a bit of not a bit of, it's a 100% abusive relationship essentially.
oh yeah.
And I do like that we get a chance to get the story from the person who doesn't recognize that they're in that relationship until someone has to sit them down and say, okay, here's the thing. Lore's a bitch. And you kind of have to, that part made me crack up so much. I was like, this is so good. I'm like, that's precious.
It's
He's
like,
like, what do you mean no one likes lore? No one likes lore? I thought that part was great. He's like, we all like lore, right? No?
And
no.
let's be honest, that is very relevant in this day and age. Sometimes you need to step yourself back from what everyone else in your circle thinks, and that's the problem with Instagram algorithms. And the problem with Facebook algorithms is that you are going to get yourself into your little hole, and that's all you're going to know, and then you step outside of it and you go, oh, the world is very different. And I think everybody kind of needs that opportunity to have someone else tap them on the shoulder, you know, move their hand from the gear shift to their knee and say, hey, look, here's the thing. The world is a little bit different than you've built it.
And if
And
that
then once they
person
get
looks
past
like
the
Chris
part-
Hemsworth, that's better.
And that's okay.
That's great.
I don't know how Orpheus wasn't like in love with him from the start. And like meanwhile, Fenrir is like this rat man. I love him.
He's my hot rat boyfriend.
The Rumpelstiltskin from the animated Anastasia in my head.
This is gonna be a weird movie.
Someone else said that. It's like,
That's funny.
they're like, I can only see Rasputin, and I'm like, that's fine.
I
I
accept-
Scar
I
as like
accept. That's a
Scar
fan
Jafar,
casting.
Like, give me, yeah, give me the Rat Man.
All right. Maybe that's a good place to kind of start wrapping things up. Like, if you had some people don't ever want to see their written work any other way than they have presented it. But if you had the chance, if you could make it a graphic novel, a comic book, TV series, animated series, anime, movie, like no budget restrictions. You can do everything your heart desires. Do you have another form of media you want to see this in besides audiobook? Because we know that that's going to happen.
I would get the studio who did Arcane to animate.
Oh,
Ooh, that's a good one.
it would take
choice.
years.
Yeah,
It's so beautiful.
very expensive too. So you
Very
said sky's the
Yeah.
limit, so I chose.
That's true.
I
You
love
chose
that.
the
I love
limit.
I chose the limit.
You chose the literal sky.
Chris
beautiful.
Hemsworth's also just a voice actor in it as well. Like you're
There
gonna
you
get
go.
everybody.
Yeah,
We get
they can
Hemsworth
motion
in.
capture him. I'm sure they did that.
Yeah.
That's great.
And
And
a video game.
a video game would be fun.
That
I
could be
would-
fun.
A video game would be amazing.
I would
I
love
have
to play
another
some of those
property
dragon
that would make a
battles.
much better video game, but it would have to be artistic. I don't know. Give me like a Baldur's Gate that could work.
I was just about to say, what
Just
about like a
characters,
Baldur's
like,
Gate? You could have
Dealing with their shit.
Mhm,
That's
mhm,
fantastic.
You can
That's all I
choose who
want.
you romance.
Mhm.
mhm. Choose
Um,
your own Orpheus.
Everyone chooses Fenrir.
That's true. Yeah,
I
everybody
choose
like-
Orpheus. Hopefully, no one chooses Lore. I don't blame
Seriously.
you. Because the skeleton
Someone's
comes
going
with her,
to.
So
She
like,
does. She's riding in on a giant skeleton. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a little hot.
It's a
So
2-for-1 deal too. So that-
the skeleton comes with
he comes with her.
So I know we mentioned at the top of this episode, but you are working on a sequel. So I know that there's probably not much that you can say, but is there anything about book 2 that you want to tease?
Ooh, it starts off with Orpheus getting in a fight with some kids, and that's a remaining theme through the entire book.
Get off
Is
my
Orpheus-
lawn.
I was
He
gonna say, get off
loses
my
the
lawn.
fight with the kids.
With the
by
children.
way. So,
There's a student out of bed. Like
The
that's what
first
just went
book-
through my head is Snape with his cape just going
Yeah.
around chasing children at Hogwarts.
the first book started with public humiliation, so if that doesn't get you to read the first one,
Oh, okay. I know where we're going with this.
we just like to torture Orpheus in this house.
This poor guy.
Poor Orphe. Poor
Yeah,
Fifi.
poor Fifi.
Fiona, where can everybody find your book, buy your book, support you, find you on Instagram? Like, what is the best way for us to support you as a budding fantastic
Book
Yeah.
gram.
Oh my gosh.
Sir.
We can
Okay,
speak.
in case like social media gets banned across the board,
And
go sign
explodes.
up for my newsletter. It's a Substack, and I
that.
think it's go on my website fionafennwrites.com, and there's a sign up form on there. And then I'm on Instagram's like my main social media platform, and that's by Fiona Fenn over there. I don't really I sometimes post on TikTok, but you won't find me there because I forget it exists for like weeks at a time, and then I'm like, oh, I should go post a
I'm the
video.
same way
Two
about
Ns,
TikTok.
right?
2 N's.
F-E-N-N.
Yes.
Okay. As
And
someone who's
that's-
had to spend their entire life pronouncing and spelling their last name, I feel like it's very important. that
Oh,
we get that right.
it is. No, it is right. Because I think I've spelled Fen because it's like an actual word. I've been spelling it wrong my entire life because I thought it had 2 N's and it only has
That's
one.
funny.
But my last name has 2 N's.
And then, where can people find the book?
Okay, so you can, if you want to support my local bookstore and you want to buy a physical copy, go buy it from Shelf Life Books. It's like shelflifebooksrva.com. They did my promo tour for me, like my book launch, and they're like the nicest people ever. So if you want to
I love
support
small bookstores.
local and get a physical book, definitely buy it through them. And then if you want a digital copy, Amazon. That's really. Can you buy it off Barnes and Noble? You could. I used to work there. I should probably promote them. But Amazon, I think, gives me the highest royalty rate. So
That's
Well,
that's what we
that's
want. We're gonna support
important.
you.
That's
We're
important.
paying you.
okay. And then
We're
Amazon.
getting you
I'm
paid.
crying right now for the people who don't see the video. There's a tear rolling down my cheek. But it is the world we live in, but maybe not for much longer.
As long as we're here, you should buy it so that Fiona gets some cash.
Yeah.
And if all else fails, dragons, and then we'll be good. Like
There-
if the
there are
world does
dragons.
come to an end, I'm afraid I do insist upon dragons.
The
Yeah.
dragons
Yeah.
will have to appear somehow. I haven't seen one yet, but
Yeah. Well,
We're
if
waiting.
My,
It's
if
on
my
Dragon
book
Watch.
is any way like predicative of the future, we'll have lots of dragons.
We'll have dragons in the
Yeah.
there you
I'm so
go. We
happy.
just have
Yeah.
to wait a little
I'll tame one.
while.
Mhm.
I'm a zookeeper. I can do it.
Well, thank you so much
Aw.
for coming on and joining us and talking about the book. We're so excited.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun.
And so we always have our guests close out our episodes with us. So we tell our listeners to stay legendary. So would you like to close us out?
Yeah. So what do I just say? Just
stay
You
legendary.
can
That's
say
it.
whatever
Alright.
you want. You can just
Whatever
say,
you
like,
want,
"Hey,
and then
it's
just end,
Fiona
yeah.
Fenn," and then stay legendary.
okay. Well, I'm Fiona Fenn. I'm the author of The Crack at the Heart of Everything, and I love y'all so much. Stay legendary.